Hello everyone. Listen to that audible voice. It nearly took my sanity to get the microphone going, but it's going. Welcome everyone. It's lovely to have you here tonight. I will leave the acknowledgement of country because I know that Delia has one, but I just wanted to welcome you all, but also Delia. I think most of you, a lot of you know Delia or have met Delia before. She's very well versed in this sort of stuff and we're very lucky to have her. So thank you so much, Delia. Over to you. Thank
you. Good evening, everyone. I was saying to Carlene on the way here, there was a couple of rainbows I saw in the sky. I thought that's a good omen. We'll take that. I won't complain that there was some misery around some dribble and drizzle and all of those things with the wet roads and the potholes between Hamilton and here, but they're doing a bit of work between Mayless Flat and Winslow at the moment. So I've noticed that the last couple of times I've travelled, so that's been good. By way of background, some of you may know a little bit about me, but not too much. So I might give you a little bit more of who I am and where I'm coming from, and particularly about being able to talk within this space about LGBTQIA plus diversity and sexuality and gender. My background, some of you know, I was born in Port Fairy, grew up, went to year 11 at Karamat Road, now Brower. At that stage they only had year 11 and you had to go to the annex at Timor Street to do year 12, which is now part of TAFE, I believe. And I took that time off between year 11 and did a little bit of work for a while at Cobb's Bakery in Port Fairy. I'm sure you've all had a pie or a cake from there some stage. And most kids that grew up in Port Fairy have worked there at some stage. And I was looking around at what I wanted to do, but I was also in a space of who am I as a human being and how do I fit into this environment that is Port Fairy and Warrnambool? And I didn't feel too comfortable about that. I didn't feel particularly comfortable about who I was and my sexual identity, and the idea of living within a heteronormative environment within Warrnambool wasn't what I particularly wanted. So I joined the Air Force at 17 and a half. And I ended up doing training at Laverton as a communications operator, and I went to Canberra on my posting to the RAF Communications Centre in Russell offices, which has now changed considerably to anyone who's been to Canberra over the decades. I did my 3 years that I signed up for in the Air Force, but there's a big but underlining that, because I was forced into a position where I had to have a discussion with the Communications Centre warrant officer about my sexuality. Because in the late 70s, early 1980s, they had witch hunts to kick people out of the services for who they are. So that caused a lot of distress for people I knew. It caused a number of suicides amongst people I knew. And I had to just say, please let me go quietly when my sign-on period is finished, that I've done my 3 years. Otherwise, you were discharged, services no longer required, or dishonourable discharge, whichever way they looked at it. So it was fraught with danger for many people during those time frames, and it wasn't up until the 1980s that the services said, yes, you may be LGBTQIA within the Australian Defence Forces. And so I did my 3 years, did a short stint with the Department of Immigration and Public Service. Didn't particularly like that. Just doing the same sort of work, but didn't particularly like it. So I decided to put on another uniform and I joined the Australian Federal Police. and I worked with Federal Police for 31 and a bit years. And during that time, there were a lot of changes, and a lot of those changes thankfully came about as a result of changes to things like the Anti-Discrimination Act and a lot of those types of things that came into being in the 1980s and later on. So that's a little bit about me. And what I would like to do now is acknowledge the fact that I grew up in this district and there was a lot of harm done to the Gunditjmara people. And so I want to pay my respects to them and their elders past, present and emerging. And I also want to not acknowledge in this sort of space the elders of the LGBTQIA plus community that in some instances didn't make it. Some were murdered for who they were. And a very fraught history of how people were treated also within churches. So we come in with the knowledge of that sort of background, and we're looking at a space where we can learn more and we can move forward and we can create a better space, particularly in accordance with the basis of union, being accepting of all people, and also with regards to being a safe church, creating a safe space. So we acknowledge where we've come from and who we are, and we're on a journey and we're on that constant pilgrimage as we enter our 50th year as to where we're going. Okay, so today we're going to cover a few different things. I have to take my glasses off from time to time because of what they're designed for. So excuse me if that's a bit distracting for you. So today we're going to talk a bit about definitions, and we're going to have a lot of discussion about gender and sexuality, and we may be even talking a little bit about biology and some science around body parts, because you can't talk about some of the definitions that we're talking about today without going to a little bit of those sorts of things. We're going to talk about coming out, how that is still important and why it's still important. And we're going to talk about the 3 H's: heteronormativity, heterosexism and homophobia, and the impact of the 3 H's and some of the main Australian studies around that. Some of the issues that we still have to work through, and a little bit about inclusive practices and how we as a church community can get there as a community and also as individuals. Now, some of you may already be doing a lot of stuff as an individual, but sometimes you might not feel comfortable about acting upon some of the things that you see and hear within different spaces in a community. So hopefully some of the things that we talk about today will give you a little bit of emphasis around feeling a bit more confident about what you're saying, and that it's okay to stand up for people who need to be stood up for, because that's what being Christian's about. Okay. We're going to have a little bit of a brief discussion first, because I've noted that sometimes you love discussions and sometimes you don't. And Carlin raises that on a regular basis, I've noted. But I'm going to perhaps, you've got on average 4 people, or 3 or 4 people in a row. So if you're happy to talk in a row or talk to the person next to you about these questions. What box do you put yourself in? Introduce yourself to the person next to you, and I know some of the people around you already know, but introduce yourself to the person next to you by discussing how you label yourself. And then we're going to have some group discussion about why do we need to label ourselves. Okay? So I'll give you 5 minutes to start off and see how we go. No? Just general. How do you label yourself? Introduce yourself by some of the labels that you might use to describe yourself, and we'll talk about why we use labels. Okay? So, Have a bit of a discussion with the person next to you or the people near you. If there's anyone that feels out of place or needs someone to talk with, let us know. So just make sure that everyone's shared a little bit and that we haven't just heard from one person in your little group. Okay, folks, I might draw you back in and refocus. Can I draw you back towards your, have a little bit of a refocus. Now, what did you find interesting about that exercise? We've got this one down here for, sorry, sir. Royce. Yeah. Labels, yeah. How did you label yourself? Lovely. At the back. White Anglo female Christian. And some others. Okay, some more examples of what we got. Yep. I'm sorry, I don't know everyone's name, so. Brooke. Where did you go? What path did you journey down? So you were talking more about your intrinsic being than the external appearances and labels that people have an expectation for you to use. Often people identify with their role, who they are as a minister or a police officer or a public servant, a school counsellor, a school teacher, a husband, a wife, different things like that. Because they're easy, they're not putting it all out there. Okay? When we're talking about LGBTI people, their big thing is they have to put it out there to be able to give people an understanding of who they are as a person, how they feel, how they think, and where they're coming from. And in most instances, it's looking firstly for perhaps tolerance and eventually acceptance, and further down the track, perhaps a little bit of Maslow with self-actualisation. Here I am. I've got my safety, I've got all of the things in place, and I can be who I am as a human being because people now have greater understanding, because I labelled myself. And it's not until people label themselves that you actually know sometimes who they are. You're sitting in a pew next to a person week in, week out, for however many weeks a year, and sometimes you know this much of the iceberg. And when we're talking to LGBTQIA plus people, they're putting a greater amount of the iceberg on view so you can understand who they are and who you can, or learn how you can react around them and act with them, and how you can implement just being a nice human being around those people who use labels to identify who they are. So, we're going to work step by step what LGBTQIAPN means. Because, you know, we often just say LGBTQIA, but plus. But underneath them, there's also more than just one meaning to some of those letters. So there's a lot more. Like, we might talk about pansexuals and what that means, but there's also another P, which is called polyamory. And polyamory doesn't get a lot of discussion in church because people think that marriage is between a couple, or relationship is with one person, not a polyamory relationship. And I'm not saying whether I approve of or disapprove. I'm just saying there are different meanings to these letters from time to time, and there's a whole bunch of subgroups within these groups. There's gay men, and there might be something called a bear. There might be lesbians, and there might be a lipstick lesbian, there might be a butch lesbian, there might be a whole bunch of I'm just me lesbians, that sort of stuff. So we try to get an understanding of the diversity around some of these letters of the rainbow alphabet, and some of them are more complex than others. And as we work through, you'll get a better understanding of that. Okay, so originally, the word lesbian came from the Greek island of Lesbos, and it was more about an Amazonian, different side of the world, but you get the meaning, an Amazonian type tribe of women whose use of men was only for breeding purposes, and they were warrior women. And in many instances, they cut off one breast for the use of their bow and arrow when they were doing hunting and archery. It seems extreme, but this is how societies often operated, or tribes. It gives same-sex attracted women their own identity separate from gay men. But some same-sex attracted women prefer to use the term gay or queer. And we'll talk about queer a little bit later on. And again, there's a diversity, there's a range on a a scale, a spectrum of where people sit as to how we all identify. You can have clean-shaven men and you can have really hairy men. You can have really feminine women or you can have really butch women. You can have a woman who puts on her high-heel shoes and her lipstick and puts on her corporate suit and goes to work every day. And then you get a woman who puts on her hard yakkers and puts on her rubber boots and goes out to milk the cows. How we all identify and how we all dress can be different. And our perceptions about who's who comes down to the stereotypes perhaps that we may have been taught. And we'll learn a little bit more about stereotypes later. Gay, used to describe men often. Homosexual men prefer the word gay rather than the word homosexual. Homosexual was a medical term invented in the 19th century to describe sexual acts between persons of the same sex, usually men. But homosexual has been used interchangeably, but more often than not, it often refers to men. Okay? Please feel free to ask questions too. I'm happy to answer as long as we don't go too far off on tangents. Okay. Bisexual. Bisexual refers to men or women who enjoy sexual or romantic relationships with either a male or female partner. They tend to love the person, and it matters not about the gender of the person. They are stereotyped often as not being able to make up their minds. They are often stereotyped as being able to have twice the amount of dates. But a bisexual doesn't just change who they are if they're in a relationship with a person of the same sex or opposite sex. They still identify as bisexual. And that can be a hard concept for some people. You know, I know a number of people identified as bisexual that are women who have a husband, or a husband who has a wife. He's married a woman for the fact that they love that person, and we have a tendency to go, oh, they're married to a man, but they're not a lesbian, or they're married to a woman, but they're not homosexual. That's right, they're not homosexual, they're bisexual. Okay, is that confusing in any way? Okay. You have to excuse the size of the print if you're having trouble reading it. I put the slides up and I couldn't read them, so I had to go through and put them all in bold because just the way the fonts come up on the screens here. Yeah, Yes, of course we can. Transgender generally refers to a person who transcends the traditional dichotomy of male or female and does not match their socialised gender or their assigned gender at birth. And often assigned gender is based on genitals. It doesn't match how they feel as a human being. They view gender as an identity independent of sexual acts. Okay? And a sex change is not necessarily a component of being transgender. We used to have a definition legally that you couldn't be considered to be transgender unless you'd had surgery to remove your biological reproductive system. So if you wanted to be considered transgender as a female to male, you had to have had a hysterectomy. If you were a male transforming, for want of a better description, transitioning to a woman, you had to have had your bits chopped off and surgery done. That was very restrictive as a definition. It was later changed to incorporate the fact that not everyone can afford $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 to have gender reassignment surgery. Many women who transition to men often only take testosterone hormones. They can't afford the surgery to have, it's quite complex surgery to have a penis constructed. It's actually around about $100,000 to get that done. And it's quite intrusive surgery, and it's quite noticeable and you may see it or may not have seen it with anyone who's had a penis constructed or reconstruction done. They'll often take pieces of skin off the forearm and it leaves quite a large dent where they've removed the skin and some of the flesh, and they'll do it from both sides so that they can marry them together to make a penis. And then there's a lot of other things that go on regarding insertion of little pumps that are, if there's any nurses in the room, they probably know. They make little testes, and you can pump the testes, and that will help to give inflation for an erection. It's very, very intrusive. It's very, very expensive, and it's not often done here in Australia. In fact, most people that get that type of surgery done go overseas. For a male to have surgery to transition to female, it is still very painful. It's still very intrusive. There is surgery done to remove the testes and the scrotum, and they use some skin of the scrotum to make labia, and they will invert the penis to make a vagina, and they'll also take the tip of the penis to create a clitoris. The whole thing is very intense. I some years back shared a house with someone who had undertaken transition surgery and from male to female, and they spent a lot of time taking salt baths and Epsom salts and things like that, and having to use a variety of different sized dilators to ensure that the vagina that had been created stays open and working and doesn't close and all of that sort of stuff. So all of it's very intense. It's not something that people do on a whim. It's not something that people do because they've decided they want to compete in the women's 100 metres at the Olympics. All of that stuff is a lot of rubbish. And it's certainly not something that they go through to attack women in women's bathrooms. That's just all stereotypes and misnomers. Carlene's got a question. It's about who they are as a person and how they identify and how they feel. Many of my friends that I know that have transitioned just don't feel right in their body, and they're waking up every morning and they're looking in the mirror and going, this body is not who I am. I feel like a stranger looking at myself in the mirror. This part's okay, but this part's not. None of it fits with how I identify within my brain as to who I am as a person. So it's long and it's convoluted, and some people may just take hormones to help stop testosterone production and take estrogen and sometimes a little bit of progesterone to help with the female hormones and breast development and those sorts of things. Breast augmentation surgery is also expensive. You can be looking at $10,000 to $20,000 just to have breast implants done. Some people just can't afford that sort of stuff, but they can afford a much lesser amount of being able to pay for hormones and have testosterone shots or to have estrogen implants and those sorts of things. So it's quite complex, and it can take a long time. Yes, Brooke? Yes. Yes. And that fear is being used for political purposes more than anything. It's being used as a political platform to win votes, sadly. And if we were to actually look at crime figures and statistics, more often than not, crimes against women are committed by men. Crimes against men are normally committed by other men. Occasionally, men are subjected to violence by their wives and their girlfriends and partners, but more often than not, the majority of violence across the board is by men. And that's why the information that we get from 1800 Respect and Domestic Violence Services and Rose and those sorts of people is mainly focused on changing the behaviour of men. So, are there any more questions about transgender before we move on to another slightly more complex biological phenomenon? Okay. Yes, Julie.
Working with trans young that are around 16, 17, 18 years.
Yeah.
And just seeing the change in them, their struggle when they turn 18, they start hormone treatment.
Yes.
Just seeing them, then they'll come back and visit us and take who they really are, the blossoming of these young people who now have stubble,
Yes.
They feel that they are who they really always were.
Yes.
But those years of 16, 17, 18 are really tricky.
Yes.
Mental loss, mental health, probably in their lives because it all just got too hard because there's something you can just go to a GP and start hormones.
No.
Expensive counselling
Correct.
over the whole period.
And this again ties in with the fact that you have people in the political sphere saying that, you know, the transgender or the gay agenda is to steal your children and change them and do all of these things. It's not going to happen. There are legal requirements as to when you can start hormones, which is 18. Sometimes there are exceptions, and those exceptions have had to fight battles through courtrooms for that sort of stuff to happen. And Georgie Stone is one of those examples. She had to fight a battle to be able to start transitioning earlier. And a lot of the arguments around supporting the purpose of the transition was around health and mental health purposes. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those things as well, and we'll talk a bit about suicide and suicidal ideation as well. The next one is intersex. Intersex, not into sex. Okay. Intersex describes a condition where an infant is born with a chromosomal pattern or external or internal organs that don't match what we think are exclusively male or female. Okay. Now sometimes an intersex baby is born and the doctors go into a panic and they tell the parents, oh, your poor child has been born in a particular manner. They're going to have a very hard time at school. We need to do normalisation surgery to fix them. The problem is they're taking a guess as to what sex they should be assigned, and they perform surgeries that can then have some very deep complications later on. And some of those complications are very sad. And the outcomes can be very sad. For those of you who have been born on and worked in and on around farms, you may have seen calves or sheep or whatever born with some of these types of conditions. And, you know, if it's a lamb or whatever, sometimes they just get knocked on the head. We can't do that as human beings. We have to look at helping the person to become who they're meant to be, and for them to have a choice about what happens to their bodies, and that they're not just wheeled off and given normalisation surgery. Now, surgery is fine in instances where it's an imperative that the baby is able to urinate and have bodily functions that are going to be congruent with them having a healthy life. But you don't need to mess around with genitals until much later on. Yes, Luke? Yes. Luke's question was about parts of the Pacific where there is a high propensity for birth of children with intersex conditions. That has occurred in more often in places like Tahiti and in the Caribbean. In the Dominican Republic, they have a high population of babies born with intersex conditions. In those places, they often don't have the medical tools and the access that we have in our communities and our health systems. So a lot of those babies are born that are born with those intersex conditions are left to develop, and actually they do have sometimes they'll have some hormonal changes through adolescence. And then identify or become the person that they're meant to be in regards to how their body has reacted with their hormonal development. And previously they were... Yeah, there are a number of trans people that are transgender in the Tiwi Islands, and there are ladyboys in Bangkok. Sadly, a lot of those, and they're mainly transgender people that are identifying as ladyboys, and because of their society and how they are accepted or not accepted, they often end up working on the streets of big cities like Bangkok, and unfortunately many of them don't make it because of the lifestyle they're forced into. There is also a small portion of intersex people that do identify as LGBT, and there are some that don't. So this is about the physical body. I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into some of these conditions. And some people may even be born with some of these conditions and not be told or not know that they've had some of these conditions. Some young girls get told, you can't have babies, but they don't know why. Or young boys have ended up with not having descending testes and they don't understand why. Yes? No. It's just the way things happen in nature, that sometimes stuff doesn't develop the way that we think they should. I'm not going to go through all of those conditions on there, but I am going to go into some of the major ones, just to give you a little bit of an understanding. We all actually start off as girls, and what happens during the processes of our growth and development within the womb, there is what's called an testosterone wash or an androgen wash that happens, and that can determine what your physical characteristics are going to become. So people that are born with an androgen insensitivity syndrome can't convert the androgens during the testosterone wash whilst they're in vitro. So, and androgen insensitivity syndrome is one of the more common syndromes. And that can be the complete or partial androgen insensitivity syndrome. So people with AIS you're often genetically 46XY and can be born with testes. Physical characteristics or the phenotype can vary from male to female and anywhere in between. So we're taught that you're XX or XY, but there are a whole bunch of different chromosomal patterns that happen, and those different chromosomal patterns are intersex conditions. Okay? And you might hear about some of these conditions. And some of these can be physically ambiguous, and some people can be born with internal testes, look like a female but have an enlarged clitoris, or have no distended testes at all, but have a penis. There's a whole bunch of different things. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia often relates to being born male, with physical male attributes, but something like the urethra doesn't come out at the end of the penis. So that's hyperplasia. It can come out underneath. So a lot of things are corrected around making sure that a person can go to the toilet and do those sorts of functions. And then later on, as things start to develop and change with your adolescence, you then get to hopefully decide for yourself who you're going to be as far as taking any hormones. So that's hyperspadias I just talked about. And gonadal dysgenesis is where the infant is born with underdeveloped gonads that can affect the fetal development. And a lot of the effects of some of these, and majority of these, is that the genitals may look normal but not be normal on the inside. For all intents and purposes, you might look at a baby and go, yes, that's a girl, but they might have a vagina and no uterus, or they might have ovaries, again, and no uterus, or they might have testes and no uterus. So there's all sorts of different things that can develop within the human body that are not about just XX and XY chromosomes, which is why it's important to not have politicians define male and female as being how they see their version of their understanding of biology and science, because it's often just relating to science that they might have been taught in the 1960s or 1970s or maybe even to the 1980s, because it isn't until much later on that we start to learn a lot more about these conditions. I'm going to tell a short story about a Canadian story that you may have seen on 60 Minutes. Two twins, the Reimer twins. They were both born boys in Canada in the 1970s, and their parents decided that they wanted both of these boys circumcised. And what happened was they melted the penis of one of the boys because they were using a laser type, cauterizing type thing to circumcise the penis. They melted his penis. There was a guy who was a New Zealander who his name was Dr. John Money. Dr. Money said, give me any child and give me the right hormones and with the right treatment and so forth, we can turn any child into the sex that we think that they should be. So he's taken this poor little boy with the melted penis and given him a whole bunch of hormones as he started to develop, and they did a lot of surgery to turn him into a girl. And the story is on 60 Minutes, is the David and Catherine Reimer story. So anyway, this poor kid grew up thinking that they were a girl. They'd been turned into a girl as an experiment by Dr. Money, and it did not go well. And this poor kid lived a life as a girl, was told that they couldn't have children, etc., etc., didn't find out the truth until much later on. They had married a man. They didn't feel right within their body and about all that had happened. Eventually, suicide was the result. There's a more closer to home, a friend of mine who previously worked in the Federal Police with me, a person by the name of Tony Briffa. Tony lives up towards Melbourne way. Tony was born with an intersex condition. One of those conditions where they said, penis isn't big enough to be a boy, let's do some chopping and a bunch of surgeries, and they turned Tony into a girl. And that story is also available on 60 Minutes. You can find it on YouTube. It's called Antoinette's Story. So they did a lot of work on through one of the hospitals in Melbourne on the gender reassignment of Tony into Antoinette. And Antoinette actually had a twin sister, so it was the perfect test case for those who were involved in this science and writing research papers about gender and sex reassignment and all of those sorts of things. But Tony didn't feel right as a girl, and was always going to hospital and having all of these treatments done at the hospital and not understanding why they had to go and have all of these surgeries, because they did a bunch of surgery on Tony over the years. And it wasn't until Tony was a teenager and they'd gone back to the hospital for yet another appointment and yet another surgery and being filled with hormones and so forth, that Tony was at the doctor's surgery and saw their file sitting on the desk and has opened the file and looked at some of the stuff that was in the files and said, oh, my chromosomes say I'm meant to be a boy, and I've been raised as a girl, and I've been going through all of this stuff of being a teenage girl and not being able to understand why everyone else around me was developing differently and getting periods and so forth, and I wasn't having those things happen. So later on, as an adult, Tony decided perhaps that they should try some testosterone, because that's what their body should be. And that worked for a while, but Tony still didn't feel comfortable in their own body. And now, and they changed the pronouns a few times, trying to work out where they sat and how they fitted. But at the end of the day, Tony is now just using they, them as their pronouns, because it's too complicated. And Tony is married with a lovely wife, despite all the doctors and all of the things that happened, they're still a reasonably happy human being, given all that's gone on and all of the things that they had to endure. Let's take 5 minutes break for those who want to go to the bathroom, and we'll come back and have some more discussion, just a little bit more discussion about intersex, and then we're going to move on to some of the other definitions. Okay, just 5 minutes. I know a lot of this stuff will be a bit daunting and you might have a lot of questions too. So, all right, I was asked a question about percentages and incidence of intersex. So that's, on average, some of the more common incidence of intersex, depending on the type, it varies about 1 in 1,000, and normalisation surgery happens to about 1 or 2 babies in 1,000 births. Okay? We will make these figures available, and we will send information out to you guys so that you can get a bit deeper understanding. I would often conduct some of this training over a 3-day period, okay, for police officers who were wanting to become lesbian and gay liaison officers, or for some people who just wanted to have an understanding about this stuff. And as well as training police officers, I trained some military people as well. And previously I've done some of this sort of work teaching people at Lifeline on what being LGBTI means and what's going on around it. We're still on definitions. Queer. The term queer is being reclaimed by many people in the LGBTQIA+ community. For some older people, it is still a bit fraught because the word queer was used as a bludgeon, so to speak. Oh, you're weird, you're queer, you know, and it was used to put down people for who they were. But many of the younger people now have reclaimed it and they quite happily use the term queer, although we'll use the term genderqueer as a descriptor of them being non-conforming, with the usual gender dichotomy or the binary. Okay. Yep. Yep. It's, oh, yeah. It's an umbrella. It's very much become an umbrella term. And it's often easier just to say you're part of the queer community rather than going, I'm from the LGBTQIA++ community. And, you know, in May we had some stuff around Ida Hobbit Day, International Day Against Homophobia, on the 17th of May, which coincides with the United Nations saying that homosexuality is no longer a disease in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And it started off as Idaho Day, International Day Against Homophobia, and over the last decade or two it's evolved to International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, intersexism, etc. So it's become Ida Hobbit. It is cute. Asexual or non-sexuality, a lack of sexual attraction to anyone, or low or absent interest in sexual activity. Some people may consider it a lack of sexual orientations or one of the many orientation variations. The prevalence of asexuality from a study back in 2004 in the British population said it was about 1%. And this is obviously distinct from abstaining or celibacy. And similar, I don't know why that did that. Aromantic. Aromantic is a definition of having little or no romantic feeling towards others, or feeling no romantic desires or attraction. And as it says there, it was inserted into the Oxford Dictionary in 2018. And you notice as we're going through, I've put a lot of different coloured flags that align with the different identities. Ever since what's his name? Gilbert Baker in 1978 devised the original rainbow flag. People have decided that they will make flags for all of the different identities so everyone can help formulate who they fit in with, who they identify with, and how comfortable they feel with having someone that they can identify with. There's a saying about if you can't see it, you can't be it. You need examples of different things out there to inspire you and to feel that you're not alone. So that's where this fits in. Pansexual or omnisexuality is sexual attraction, desire, romantic love or emotional attraction towards people of any sex or gender identity. Pansexuals refer to themselves as gender blind, rejecting the gender binary of male, female, and are open to relationships with people who do not identify strictly as men or women. This would fit well for people who are attracted to anyone, including transgender people or non-binary people. A bisexual person has more of a tendency to be attracted to male or female, more often than not. Whereas pansexual will say, I am attracted to trans people or non-binary people, or so and it's not always the case, but bisexuals have more of a tendency to work within the male-female dichotomy more often, just for definition purposes. So, yeah, Brooke. Yes, it is. But you will find that there are some bisexual people that will never ever want to have a relationship with a transgender person. Yes, exactly. So, again, it comes down to who are you attracted to, and who are you willing to be intimate with. Non-binary or genderqueer gender identities are those that are outside the male-female gender binary. Non-binary identities sometimes fall under the transgender umbrella, but not always. And more often than not, it's about non-conformity or not feeling like you're either male or female. So they're sometimes called, yeah, they're not sitting within the binary, and they're sometimes cutely called NBs. I'll just zip through some of these useful terms. SSA means same-sex attracted. SSAY is same-sex attracted youth. They don't fall within the normal dichotomy of male or female. They might sit somewhere on a scale, and we'll look at a scale shortly that might help with understanding that a little bit. Checking with her, paying attention. A queen is a member of the royal family, or there can be a drag queen or a drag king. And going way back, a faggot was the bundle of sticks that were used to burn queers at the stakes. And thus it was used as a term to be derogatory to homosexuals. You're a faggot, you deserve to be burned at the stake. And not all those that are within that GLBTIQA plus basket or under the umbrella, not all of those people are same-sex attracted, because there are a difference in biological and gender variations. Does that make sense? Okay. I did want to show a video, but it won't work. We'll send it out. It was a video by Robin Whittaker. Many of you know her. She's a theologian up in Pilgrim College, Melbourne. And she was talking about male and female and gender with regards to Genesis. And it's a good little connector for people of faith, I think, to have that little bit of understanding, because many people are stuck in the creation stories, whereas there's two versions of the creation story, and we were all made in God's image, both male and female. So we'll share some of that information later on. I'm not sure if you can see this diagram quite clearly. The top line is the biological sex. So at one end of the scale you'll have female and the other end you have male, and in the middle sits intersex. Okay. The next line down is about gender identity, and it is about the man and woman at either end of the scale, and in the middle you have gender queer or bi-gender people. Next line down is gender expression. So we might express ourselves as masculine or feminine, and in the middle we may have androgyny. Excuse my voice. And then we have sexual orientation, and you can be attracted to women or you can be attracted to men, and then you can have a whole bunch of different people on the opposite ends of the scale. Or there's normally a bit of a bell curve if you look more closely at some of the stuff from Kinsey. Non-binary? In the gender. You may find yourself slightly, for those that are non-binary, might find themselves not sitting on one of those scales. But you could look at them as sitting in the middle of being gender queer on the second line. Your gender identity is. Yes. Yes. It's about performance, theatre. Sometimes they're gender bending. How they identify with their sexuality can be different to that, but majority of things like drag queens is about performance art. If you go back over the centuries, we have Roman amphitheatres and plays done and performed in Roman amphitheatres where there was mainly men doing the performances of whatever role. Shakespearean plays as well. Many times women were not allowed to be on the stage. It was quite common in wartime entertainment that you would have people like Tony Curtis and whoever getting dressed up and overemphasising big boobs and all sorts of stuff. And it's all about performance, and a lot of it's about fun. And it's not necessarily about I identify as a drag queen. It's just something that they do for entertainment purposes. Although you might have had in the past someone like Carlotta in Sydney, who did a lot of drag shows and then later transitioned. So their performance art turned into them actually having a recognition of how they felt with their own gender identity, and they went through surgical procedures to realign their gender with how they felt. He identifies as a beard. Yeah, well, listen, some people, well, we're going to go into a little bit more of aspects about sexuality and gender appearance in a minute. I don't want to go too deep because we need to think about how long we're here for. But this is an easy way to explain things. There is our sexual identity, our sexual orientation, and our our sexual behaviour, and that can be a moving feast because sometimes we might identify as being straight as your sexual orientation, and your sexual identity is as heterosexual, but your sexual behaviour might be what is known as my brain. I can get it. I will get it eventually. Situational. Situational sexuality, and that often occurs for people who are in prison, places like that. Okay, because they're, for all normal purposes, they identify as being heterosexual. They may even have a wife or a partner on the outside, but they might have sexual activity with someone of the same sex in prison. And that's just about relief, so to speak. Okay, Brooke? Yes. Yes, and trauma does impact a lot of people. How you behave. Yeah. Some people might become celibate because they've had sexual trauma, or some people decide I'm never going to have another partner again because of something that happened to them, or decide that I now hate men because they were sexually abused as a child, those sorts of things. So there's a whole bunch of different things that go into this sort of thing. The gender-breed person is an easy way to identify some of the things that happen around attraction and identity and how we behave. Our heart tells us who we are attracted to. I think about my wife. How I identify is up here in my brain, and that's evolved over time as to how I identify. Who you have sex with can depend on who turns you on. And again, part of that is attraction and identity, and how we express ourselves on the outside can give people an idea of how we identify with and who we are attracted to, how we express ourselves. We might express ourselves on the outside by dressing in farm clothes all the time, but on the inside our identity is heterosexual and we love our husbands or wives, or however it goes, okay? I won't go too much into this, and there's a whole bunch of stuff about the formulation of sexual and gender identity and the development of the brain and the CAS model. We don't have time for all of that. One thing that is problematic at the moment, I will say, is that once upon a time, gay people used to meet in gay bars, or sometimes men who like to have sex with men, not necessarily identifying as gay people, might meet at what is called a beat for the purposes of sexual engagement. There is less of that happening now, but there is more danger occurring for both heterosexuals and homosexuals, or however people identify, through the use of telephone apps for the purposes of meeting up and having casual sex. I have known people who have been blackmailed as a result of the use of one of those apps. Many heterosexual people know about Tinder and use Tinder. Gay men often use Grindr. I know of a person who was blackmailed by some young people. I know of a couple of different cases actually. I know someone who was blackmailed by some young people on the coast of, south coast of New South Wales. This person went to meet someone that they thought was legitimately looking to have some sort of a weekend, and this person was murdered. I also know of a male person who was blackmailed by some young people in Canberra, and because he wasn't completely out to his family and what they were threatening to do, and they did this to a number of people, my friend suicided as a result of being blackmailed through the use of telephone applications. So I'm always very cautious and warn people about using telephone apps. You don't, whether you're straight or gay or whatever, you don't know who you're meeting. You don't know what they're going to be like. And there's something to be said for the nice old-fashioned way of meeting people and getting introduced to them and getting to know people before racing off for sexual purposes. Scoot through all of this stuff about the stages of coming out and all that sort of stuff.
I just wanted to check out how you felt about it. It seems like there's a lot more covering this.
Yeah.
I just wanted to like that. Is it okay going on who you are? Okay. Well, we
Yeah.
are sorry about that, but we are recording.
We can do another session another time. I'm gonna do about 10 minutes. If that's, yeah, I'll just do about 10 minutes. For those who want more and want to write down. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of different stuff that you can do to help understand LGBTQI plus people. And I just want to say that it is coming out is a process, and it's very hard and it's not easy. And it's all about whether you will be accepted or rejected. And it's not easy. The impact of heterosexism, heteronormativity and homophobia is quite heteronormativity is the belief that human beings are created to be heterosexual, that we're complementary categories of male and female, and that sexual and marital relationships are normal only between male and female of different, and that each gender has certain roles in life. Okay, so that's heteronormativity. Heterosexism is the assumption that everyone is of a particular, everyone that is heterosexual is normal and everybody outside of that is abnormal, and they don't often take into account the existence of other genders or other relationships apart from heterosexuals. And homophobia is a prejudice or hatred. If you actually look at the definition of a phobia is a fear of something. Homophobia is not necessarily a fear. It can be a lack of understanding, a lack of empathy, or a prejudice that you've been taught growing up, or a prejudice that you've learnt. And homophobia may include physical or emotional violence towards people who are same-sex attracted or who don't fit into the heteronormative sphere of just being male and female. And there's a lot of stuff around in theology about that. And if you were to listen to Robin Whittaker talk, she will tell you that once upon a time she would use the Bible and theology to justify the exclusion of homosexuals from church. She will now tell you that she looks at the Bible and reads it so much more differently now in her years of being a theologian, and that she can see that there is much more to things than the narrow definitions that many of us may have been taught as youngsters. and that a good place to start might be looking at some of the things written by a now deceased American theologian, Rachel Held Evans. She did some amazing stuff in the Pentecostal evangelical type circles. But there are lots of negative outcomes to homophobia, and they include things like basically gay and lesbian people are more likely to have attempted suicide, 4 times more likely to have attempted suicide, twice as likely to have psychological problems, more likely to suffer from chronic illnesses because they're stressed all the time about, are people going to judge me? Is it safe for me to go to this place? Is it safe for me to be in this church? Is it safe for me to be around these people? It's been a long time, but I did something with a church group earlier this week, and I thought, I'm not going to mention anything about my sexuality because I didn't feel 100% safe, even though it was a training for church people in the Western Presbytery, Western Vic Presbytery. I didn't feel 100% safe, so I didn't come out. And I was very limited with what I said about some of the things. So we'll just move on from some of that. There are a whole bunch of different studies about the impacts of heteronormativity, heterosexism and homophobia. And a lot of it is around people not feeling safe. There's been quite a number of surveys done, in particular the Private Lives survey. They're just about to do Private Lives survey number 4. They first started back in 2002. They did the next one in 2006. There's also surveys amongst young people called the Writing Themselves In survey. It's up to about number 4 or 5 as well. So these surveys are long-term surveys that give us a good picture about some of the impacts of what happens and the impacts of mental health, and also the impacts of the violence that is experienced by people within the LGBTI community. It's quite high. And many people have had depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation as a result of the insults, the abuse, the rumours, the intimidation, and there's physical attacks and all sorts of stuff. Yes, Carmen? The most recent one is too small to read, I'm sorry. But basically, the majority of same-sex attracted people and youth and genderqueer kids, they don't feel safe. They're writing themselves in report. So this one is going back. Oh, this one up here is Private Lives 2021. And it is saying that, let me just get to the copy where it's a bit easier. They have improved a lot. Yes. And the main thing that young people are looking for is feeling safe. Private Lives survey, 1 in 6 trans men, 8.9% of trans women and 7% of non-binary participants reported having attempted suicide in the past 12 months as a result of how they're treated, how they're not accepted. And Private Lives 4 is just being undertaken, and it is open until the 11th of July for those who are interested in that. So there's a lot of stuff about the impact. So some of the other issues that I'll go to, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we can do to be better allies, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm sorry that some of this might sound a little bit rushed. The family violence amongst LGBTI people occurs at the same rate as heterosexual relationships. For a long time, people thought that, women wouldn't be violent towards other women, men wouldn't be as violent towards their same-sex male partner, etc. But in the last 5 or 10 years, that has been dismissed as it's about the same rate as heterosexual relationships. And ouching is still used as a power and control mechanism, being coercive, especially in a relationship where one partner's not out. There is a terrible impact upon homelessness. US figures show about 40% of LGBTI youth in the US have experienced homelessness. And the figures here aren't too different from that. And most of it comes to the fact that kids come out, they get kicked out of home. And it's even worse if they've got a different gender identity. There's still this religion and culture play a big part, and a big thing for many people is identity documents are a real problem. Getting your birth certificate changed, getting your identity documents changed and altered, and your driver's licence changed. It's a real process, and people don't know how they're going to be treated when they front up to the motor registry and produce a stat deck and say, I want to change my driver's licence, or they're worried about turning up to a government authority to change their identity. It has a huge impact. And passports is a big thing. The US has gone backwards at an incredible, phenomenal rate, and in majority of the US states now, because Donald Trump said that there is only male and female. Yeah, but he's put it into law, and it's meant that someone who had previously been travelling freely with a passport identifying them as female has now received stuff in the mail to say you can no longer identify as female, come and get your passport redone because you have to identify as what you were born as. And it doesn't take into account young kids that are born with intersex conditions. It's terrible. And we will imprison you or arrest you if you're using a driver's licence that's not in your correct gender. It's really, really quite bad. So the best things that we can do as allies here is to affirm who people are, support them for who they are. If someone says to you, hey, you're the first person I've spoken to, I'm coming out as whatever it may be, thank them for telling you. Thank them for trusting you enough that they felt confident enough that they could tell you about who they are. It could be a grandchild or a great-grandchild saying, Nana, Pa, I can't tell Dad because I'm scared of Dad, but I think I'm gay. Or I think I'm not really a boy. Affirm to them that you've heard them, you're listening, and that you're there for them. That's one of the best things that you can possibly do. And what do gay people want from the federal government? This is from 2018. They want banning of gay conversion therapies and pray away the gay stuff. In some places it's still not banned. It's still being worked on in some places. equal rights and protection for families in federal law, that some of that's still not quite there yet. Majority of LGBTI people want the exemptions removed, especially for religious bodies and schools and churches and hospitals, to discriminate against them and to sack them for who they are. It still happens. And they're being empowered even more recently by the stuff that Pauline Hance is saying. More recently, my Facebook feed, I'm getting more and more stuff from the Australian Christian Lobby and, believe it or not, Lyle Shelton once again, because they're jumping back onto the transgender hate bandwagon because they're being emboldened by what's happened in America and, especially Queensland. Queensland stopped affirming medications and hormone treatments for young trans kids because of the Liberal government in Queensland, and there's been court battles going on to reverse that sort of stuff. So once again, changing agenda is not easy. It's not done on a whim. Identifying people as being in need of support and helping them with support is one of the best things that you could do as a church and a church community. And inclusive practices are what's needed for people to feel less isolation. If we mainstream sexual diversity and make it normal that there is diversity and we celebrate diversity and we facilitate social connection, it means that people are less isolated. Farmers are far more likely to commit suicide than other men. But then you have young farm men and teenage boys who haven't received affirmation about who they are. And they're doing things like having vehicle accidents on a straight road, driving into a single tree. So confidentiality, being positive and affirming for someone who's coming out, acknowledge their disclosure. Don't sit there, if you're driving and a grandchild's next to you and they come out to you while you're driving, because it's a safe place for them to come out because you're looking ahead, you're not looking at them. So they're sitting in the passenger seat and they're going to come out because it's a safer place. When they're looking eye to eye, it's really hard for someone to say, I am who I am. So if you're driving and someone comes out to you, don't drive off the road. Thank you for disclosing to me. Thank you for the privilege of being the person that you've come out to. Would you like to go somewhere and have a cup of coffee or have somewhere a cup of tea and have a chat a little bit more about this? I want to understand more about who you are and how you feel. Yeah. And ask people their names. People get stuck on pronouns. She, her, they, them. It's all very confusing. But we can use pronouns all the time with no issue whatsoever when we're talking about everyday language and doing things. We have no problem with using they and their and them. But when someone says, my pronoun is they or them, people get in a knot about it. Ask them what their name is. What's your name? Use the name. It's not hard. It's much easier. And people don't mind if, you trip and get names wrong. I get names wrong all the time. I used to be in an occupation where everyone wore a name tag. That was really good and it was really easy, but sometimes when you see a person out of context and they don't have their name tag on, you're going, were you Bev or were you Julie or were you Brooke or and it doesn't matter too much. And one of the most affirming things I think that you can do is undertake safe church training. But remember, when you undertake the safe church training, there will be a focus on children and child protection. Remember that Safe Church is about everyone. It's about bullying, it's about inclusion and exclusion. It's about just ensuring that we love on the people who are around us as a church community. And we make everyone feel safe and comfortable and able to be who they are. And remember how hard it is to reveal those intrinsic things about yourself when you need to. And again, we're trained to identify ourselves in certain ways, which was what the discussion at the front was about, and that we can learn to be more open about who we are as a human rather than just a role or a label. Humankind, be both. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Delia. I just wanted to quickly thank you again, and we've asked you to do an impossible thing, which is condense a 3-day workshop into just over an hour and a half. And we absolutely can organise another session if you'd like one, and we can expand what we're talking about. Obviously, depending on Delia's availability, that might need to be looked at in August because I'm going away for a couple of weeks in July. But that can certainly be done, and we might be able to get more into theology and what the Bible says and doesn't say, and stuff like that.
The clobber passages are a big thing.
Yeah. So we can do that. From here, we'll send out I'll send out an email. Oh, that's yours. I'm just playing with whatever's on the thing.
Yeah.
We'll send out an email with the slides and a couple of other collated resources for you, and the video that Delia referenced. So you'll get that soon, and then we'll organise another workshop from there. But thank you so much for coming out. I do think that part of being an ally is really about being informed, because it means that when someone's coming to you and saying, well, they're coming into schools and turning boys into girls, you can say, they're not, and you can help change the conversation one by one. Oh yeah, for sure. This session's been recorded. I don't know what to do with it now, but Peter Crabb does, so he'll help. And I hope it's actually a decent video, and we'll get that not just sent out to you, but uploaded generally so that whoever wasn't able to come can have access. Thank you so much for coming out, everyone. Thanks again, Delia.
Yeah.
Oh yes, come on Sunday night, 5:30, 6:30. It's going to be great.